there, beautiful people. I am Tre'vell Anderson. This is the Galeca Authors Club. I'm happy to be a member of Galeca, the Society of LGBTQ Entertainment Critics, and to be here to moderate our conversation with fellow member, I believe, if I'm not correct. Okay, yes, come on, head nod.
Hmm.
Dr. Jon Paul Higgins and their new upcoming book, Black Fat Femme, revealing the power of visibly queer voices in media and learning to love yourself. Jon Paul, say hello to the people.
Hey everybody, how you doing? How's it all? How are we all hanging in there today? I know it's tough,
We doing what
and I
we
know
can.
it is. Yes, literally. I know it's
We
been
doing what
hard,
we
but
can.
we're here. Hmm.
Absolutely. So let's dive into your book. I want
Hmm.
to first start by asking you, like, why write a book? What about this medium, attracted you to bring
Hmm.
yourself to it?
Hmm. Yeah, so I will say this. So I initially, I know everybody, in this lane, right? In media, everyone feels like, you writing a book is something as a journalist that you sometimes feel like you have to do, right, when you're doing the work. And often too, like a lot of people that I look up to, yourself included, quite a few of other individuals that I know throughout kind of the journalistic world, they have written books that have inspired me. But I will say specifically, I had been working on this in particular proposal for this book for almost since I would say probably since 2017. I went to I had gone to something called Lambda Literary and had been working on the proposal there. Thought I had something, and really it just kind of sat and collect dust. And even during the pandemic, I didn't feel moved to like to like do anything with it. And it wasn't until the top of 2024 of last year when I went to Sundance that I saw Luther's doc, that it really kind of hit me that I knew what I was going to write. It was, I'm sitting there at Sundance, I'm looking around the room, I'm hearing all of the songs, and I'm thinking about as I'm watching this film around Luther, not necessarily about Luther per se, right? Because again, the book, I don't infer that he's queer, but it brought back all of the memories, the things that they talk about in the film. If folks have not seen it, there's a very clear onus of Luther knowing that the world thinks that he's queer or how they feel about his sexuality. And I'm thinking about how my family and my friends growing up responded to the love that I had for Luther and how that made me feel. And so how I learned a lot about myself through Luther. And then it was, writing the piece on Leon Talley. It was reading your book, Tre'vell. It just, there were all of these pieces that kept reminding me and saying there's all of these visibly queer people who helped me find and figure out myself that honestly no one has talked about openly. And I just felt like I wanted to make sure I had a book that could, specifically the people who are still alive, because Luther and Andre are not, right? But there are legions of people in my book that I talk about who are important to media that are still here. And I wanted to make sure that I could encapsulate them into not only my story, but also for the world in terms of visibility. So
And for those listening, we should note that you're talking about Luther Vandross. Okay.
yes, yeah. Luther
Just
Vandross, yeah.
just to be clear for the people.
Yeah, yeah.
But I love that origin story. So you mentioned Luther, you mentioned Andre. The book really, each chapter is broken down into these, stories about your relationship to these visibly queer folks in
Hmm.
media. Many or most of them are, black, fat, perceived as femme or effeminate folks.
Hmm.
Why
Hmm.
was it important for you to specifically zero in on that slither of
Hmm.
representation?
Yeah, well, I just feel like the big girls don't ever really get the love that they deserve, right? Specifically, black fat girls, right? And I always refer to them as the dolls, right? And what I mean through this is that, trans or trans femme or non-binary, anybody in the facet of that, I feel like they don't get the love and respect that they deserve. And I just there's a lot of it. If there are things that I've heard people say to me both publicly and not, and I'm thinking about I've had to brave all of this stuff. I'm almost certain that these people probably don't get their flowers the way that they deserve, right? I'm thinking about Miss Lawrence as somebody, I talk about Miss Lawrence and Derek Jam in chapter 4. I know for a fact they don't get the love that they deserve, when in reality they were putting themselves out on the chopping block to the Black community during the time that nobody really understood what non-binary, no one knew what non-binary meant or was, right? We weren't talking about it that way. So, for me to sliver in on this idea of, for me, it was a political thing, right? It was very political for me to put fat in the title, because, and it's also part of the origin story. I don't talk about it inadvertently in my story, but, having someone in college tell me that they're not into Black fat, femme people, I had to learn how to reclaim all three of those identities, and really had to work through how to love all three of those identities. And so the stories of the folks that I include in this book, they are part of that journey for me. They seeing Derek J, seeing Miss Lawrence stand there and their full body and their power, standing in their power, it really helped motivate me to stand in mine. So
I also think it's important to note that, right, Derek J and Miss Lawrence, right, are those Black queer folks who we can point to that, led to, our language being,
mm-hmm,
appropriated on the Real Housewives of Atlanta,
mm-hmm,
for
yeah,
example.
yeah,
They were the folks who were part of that world, really, in those early years, that really, now we've got things like RuPaul Drag Race on TV and everything else, but
mm-hmm,
at that time, like you mentioned, Derek J and Miss Lawrence were, one of one at the time
mm-hmm,
in
mm-hmm,
culture. Talk
yeah.
to me a little bit about, in particular, the second part of your subtitle, "Learning to Love Yourself," right? Because this book,
Ooh, I
it's
got it.
not just kind of this exploration or honoring of these, Black and or fat and or femme folks in media. It also is slightly, instructive,
Mm-hmm,
if you
mm-hmm,
will, for the reader. And in an interesting way, you're kind of blending, I would say,
mm-hmm,
like, approaches or genres to this story, right? By doing this like media criticism, and then also doing like this, pseudo like self-help-ish
mm-hmm,
type
mm-hmm,
thing mixed
mm-hmm,
together. Why was it important to you to push the conversation beyond just what we see on screen, but
mm-hmm.
to how we all might come to love ourselves more?
Well, this book is coming out in a time, I saw it's funny because I always like to lead with context before I give content. It was funny to me because I saw someone on TikTok say, in 2020 we had all these people saying, I don't want to take the vaccine. I don't know what's in it. I don't want to do it. Yeah, I'm scared of it. Da da da. And now in 2024, you have people basically rushing to take Ozempic, right? They're taking everything. They're trying to find any means that they can to get thin. And it's a very interesting world to live in as a fat person, because it's like we were in a place where I felt like we were moving towards love your body, love who you are, love all of the parts of your identity. And now it's like almost like people reversing that. And so for my book to come out at a time where I feel like everyone's kind of celebrating the Ozempic craze, I think for me, having a self-help part, that there are people who are looking at this world and are looking at the schematics of media, and they're saying, I don't see myself, and I also don't know how to like what I see in the mirror. What do I do? And that's the thing I keep telling people, one thing that I've kind of committed myself to, in a lot of the work that I've been doing, because as you know, my day to day, during the evening, I work for a nonprofit. I mean, in the afternoons, I work for a nonprofit. And so working for this nonprofit, I'm around a lot of Black queer kids who genuinely are not being told how to like who they are, how to love who they are. And even for me, when I was a kid, I didn't have that, right? At 15 and 16, there was nobody telling me, I was 300 pounds being made fun of, and nobody was saying your body is fine. Like, you're overeating because you're stressed, right? Like, that's what this conversation is in the book. It's a lot of the realizations of a lot of the ways that I was responding to the world, a lot of the ways that I see the world, a lot of the ways that I move throughout the world. It's in no part to me. Like, I some of it is me, but it's not all me. right? And so I think that that was why it was so important for me to kind of have this self-help piece in it, right? Not all of us can afford a good therapist. And so I think it's chapter 6 or chapter 7, I talk about my relationship with my therapist and how she was able to help me understand a lot of the stuff I had internalized. And I'm hoping that if someone can't afford the $50, $60, $70 copay every 2 weeks, they can spend the $28, right, to buy this book and have chapter 6 or chapter 7 help them through whatever they're going through with their own personal identity. So.
Mm-hmm. I mentioned Drag Race earlier. You have the legendary Latrice Royale as
Amen.
the writer of your foreword.
Mm.
How did that happen? How did we secure, the queen herself?
Yeah, so a lot of it is, I'm a big believer in, shoot for the moon, girl. And if you miss, at least you land on Mars. And so I wrote the chapter. I literally just wrote the chapter. So if you read the chapter, you'll hear me talk about what led up to me meeting Latrice Royale at RuPaul's Drag Race, at the convention that they did, the first DragCon back in I think it was 2017 was the first one. And what had led up to that, how was a huge fan of her since season 4, all the thoughts I had from season 2 and season 3. I talked very openly about the anti-Blackness and the anti-fatness I saw in season 2 and season 3, specifically around Mystique Madison, Mystique, and then also thinking about Stacey Lane Matthews too, right, in season 3, them calling her a booger. And so that's a big part of that chapter. But I wrote that chapter and I sent it to Latrice and her people, and I basically had said, hey, and I sent along the photo I had with her too. I sent it over and I said, hey, I don't know if you remember me, but I just wanted to let you know that I'm writing a book. My chapter 4 is about you and the representation that you had on Drag Race, and I would just love if you would be a part of this book whatsoever. And initially she came back and said, girl, no, I never wrote nothing. I don't think this is going to work. And I said, Latrice, I said, I don't want to have to, I don't want to beg you, but I would be, because basically her thing was like, I don't know what you're really asking for. I've never done this before. It was very much kind of like, just being on the fence. And I said, I just want you to be a part of this journey. For me, I said, you writing the forward of my book would mean so much to me, because you really, in so many words, you saved my life in a lot of ways, especially at the time I met her. I was very, very, trigger warning, suicidal. And so I think after having that conversation with her on the phone about why that chapter was so important to me and why I needed to share that story, I think she came around and she was like, you know what, I'm going to do it. And I was like, okay, bet. So that's kind of how that happened. I reached out to her and her people and asked and told her about the story. And now she's the forward of my book. So.
I love it. You also have your podcast of the same
Yeah.
name.
Yes.
I wonder about how the journey of the podcast might have played into the journey of the book as well.
Mm.
Because yeah,
I
the
think
podcast, at least the podcast came out
yeah.
before the book.
Yeah. I will say this. I think so most of the time it's usually, and I've had this conversation with a couple of my friends in the industry. Most of the time it usually goes book, then podcast for a lot of people. I'm grateful that it went podcast book, because I think the podcast gave me the strength and the onus to speak honestly in a way that I don't think I would have been able to speak if I didn't have the podcast. It gave me a sense of clarity of being able to talk about, like, what does it mean to have a true representative story, if that makes sense. I think we have delved into so many topics, and one of the topics that I feel like we delved in a lot is anti-Blackness, is anti-fatness, is anti-queerness, right? The ways that the world continues to keep trying to put us off to the sidelines, or to try to get rid of us. And I think that that's what this book is really celebrating. It's this idea of different factions of my life, the world has tried to say, Jon, you don't deserve to be here. And then I was able to look out and see other people who were surviving and thriving, and be able to kind of get that message back. And it kind of all melds and folds in together of me telling this long story, this long narrative story of Black and brown people who have genuinely had to push through so many things to become who they are. And I'm happy that both of them get to exist at the same time.
I also love that I'm here looking at all of the blurbs that you have
Mm.
for your book. We've got Gabrielle Union, Francesca
Yes.
Ramsey, Jeffrey Marsh, Stephen Canals.
Hmm.
What has it been like? And me, of course.
Hmm.
Um, what has it been like receiving? I remember when I wrote my book, a lot of the process was like deeply internal and very much so with me, my editor, and the small stable of friends and family that like I shared bits and pieces with. But then sending it out to the people I wanted to blurb and hearing other people, John Q. Public, responding to what I
Yeah.
had put out into the world. How has that been for you? With people who we all look up to, who we all love,
Hmm.
as start to do the rollout of everything.
Yeah, I think for me, as much as people think that there's this big piece for me that's like really super excited, like, yes, I'm extremely grateful that Gabrielle said, yes, I want to endorse this book. And I definitely think this book is a book that people need to read. That means a lot to me, but it's also really cool to have your peers read your stuff and say, this is important. This is necessary. This is what I feel like the world needs to hear and read right now. And so having endorsements from you, having endorsements from Stephen Canals, who really was with me in the trenches as I was writing this book, because, Stephen is a really, is literally like my sister in a lot of ways, and was telling me, this is good, get rid of this. I don't think you should add, make sure you hit on this, this is what's missing. And it was really nice to just have someone kind of, as a friend and as a sister, really helping you kind of understand how you're telling your story and how you can get your story across. But I also, like I said, I think even having, there was something that Jessica Marie Garcia had shared with me off the record, and had said, I read reading your book, I recognized that there were a lot of things that you went through that you shouldn't have had to go through, and that kind of validation, right? People reading your story and saying, I understand how you became this strong person that you are, but I also want to validate that you shouldn't have had to go through any of those things. And how that rolls back into this mindset of like, you know what, you're right. Like, the world's not fair to us, and we deserve so much more than what we're given. And so it's just like I said, I think having that validation from people you look up to and you know and love, it means more with the book coming out.
And my last question for you, and then we'll open it up,
Mm.
to anyone else. What do you, who would you say this book is for?
I have reveled with this, since, published, literally since sending it off to my publisher. I've been sitting with like, who do I really want this book to be before, and you're not going to get any tears out of me, so I'm going to tell you that right now. um I will say that the biggest thing I've been committed to, and I'm going to stick to, is saying that I hope this book gets into the hands of a 13, 14, 15-year old who is looking out at the world and is scared about what their life is going to look like when they get older. And be able to read this book and say, if John can go through all of that, if John can withstand all of the things that have happened to them, and also be as fabulous and stand in a room with their head up, I can too. I've been saying it, and I'm gonna continue to say it on this press tour. I'm hoping this book saves some young kid's life. And I say young kid meaning they can be cis, they can be trans, they can be straight, I don't care. I hope that it just touches the hands of somebody who really needs to know that their life and that the way they show up in this world and in this life, is valuable. And that's really who the book is for.
Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
All
Mm-hmm.
right. Any other questions from anyone in the audience who would like to jump in?
So I've got a bunch of questions.
Cool.
But so John, I'm very happy for you. This is
Thank you.
and I think, yeah, having a podcast is a great way to sort of, say, here, I this is my this is what I've already put out there. This is my mission, and people are responding to it. So that sounds like a nice way of going about things. You got a Canadian publisher that mainly does instructional books. Do I have that right?
Academic, yeah.
And how did that happen?
Yeah, so I prior to having the new
Oh, I'm sorry, that's a dumb question. You are a professor.
No, we did that part. So they did reach it right. So I am a professor at the University of Redlands. And so I think that there was an element of them saying, we want to do a book, or we would like to have, in the early conversations of this book before it became the book that it is now, we want to have something that speaks to the intersectional experiences of people. And I said I didn't want to do something that's like chapter 1, how to love your body. Like, I didn't want it to feel so schematically like academic, if that makes sense. Like, I still wanted it to have a touch of, because again, a lot of people don't know this about me, but I have a comms degree. Like, I'm a true comms girl, house down boots, when it comes down to the way that I teach, the way I think about the world. Gender, race, and media is what I initially did my comm degree in, right? I examined or at least the thesis that I had to turn in was me looking at media back in the early 2000s. And so all that to be said, I've always had a media mind. And when they came to me and said, hey, we would love for you to do this book, or we would love to be a part of this project, I initially kind of said, I want to have a strong media emphasis in it, but I also still want to have this sense and urgency and truth around what necessarily needs to be said around Black media. And that part being, these Black people, these Black queer people in media don't get the love that they should be getting. That's really what the book kind of lands on, right? After we talk about Miss J, we talk about throughout the weaves of the book, there are these elements of these people not getting the roses that they deserve while they're alive. Like, it shouldn't have to take for Andre Leon Talley to pass for us to be able to say Andre Leon Talley was a legend, right? And so that's kind of how the book came about.
Right. And that's very interesting. It seems like books that are kind of hybrids, or not just, this is a memoir, this is oral history, this is you know uh, aspects of these genres or whatever, and also just group therapy. Beyond like sort of self-help. It's like, oh my God, these people, they have such different stories maybe, or different experiences, but they all share something that bonds them. What would you who was the most different than you person that you still related to, that maybe had a completely different story but didn't at the same time? Is that a toughie?
I'm trying to think about everybody I included in the book. I was very intentional about trying. I mean, I don't, because I hint at B. Scott, who I'm working on a project with in tandem with the book. Dexter Mayfield is someone I highlighted that, there's not a lot. Same thing with Miss J. I'll even be transparent and say there's not a lot of information on the net about Miss J. So like, and I don't know if Miss J from America's Next Top Model, there's nothing in their story that made me say, ooh, let me gravitate towards that. It was just them being a figure that I saw, that I learned to love. So that was what was kind of hard about writing her chapter was, with Latrice, me and Latrice grew up in Compton. So we had that in common. Andre Leon Talley, I knew that they had struggles in their, education. After reading their book and after watching their documentary, I knew that they had struggles while they were in school. So I could relate to that, right? There were all these different people that I had saw that they were very open about the struggles they had. But Miss J was like, there's nothing. So I really had to come up with something creatively to work with me saying I want to uplift Miss J in this book. And it was really around this notion of like seeing her as, one of her quotes, that's what initially made me write the chapter the way that I did, the quote about, she can be ugly as the bottom of a shoe, but you can still, long as you learn how to work in that shoe, you can do anything. And that's what really made me go, oh, that's what this chapter is about. It's this notion of Miss J saying, no matter what cards are dealt to you in this life, as long as you learn how to make those cards work, you're good, right? And so yeah, that's kind of where that came from.
Yeah, they're quite mercurial, from my experience.
Yeah.
Neal, did you have a question?
Sure. Yeah. Congratulations first, Dr. John,
Thank
on the book.
you.
I mean, it's just to me such an accomplishment just to put something like that out. Tell me first, just, for people who have thoughts about writing a book, was it intimidating initially? What are some tips that you have for actually sitting down and getting the damn thing done?
Whew, my God. Well, one, having a contract. That's one of the things, right? Them saying, "Oh, I need the book by September." For me, it was, at the time I wrote this, I tell everybody I sold the book in May, and they said, "We're going to need your book by October."
Oh, wow.
And then I was like, okay, I can do that. I wrote a dissertation in 3 months. I got this, right? And then them saying, actually, because we want to release it on Trans Day of Visibility, we're gonna push that up. And so I lost a month in writing the book. And being like, oh, okay, life is happening, but also I still have this contract to do. So there was that. But I will say, I think the biggest thing that I would tell anybody who is wanting to sit down and write a book, outside of make sure that you have a good agent and you have a pretty good notion or understanding of the place you're publishing with, I would also say make sure that you really know what you want to say. I think that's the thing that really drove me, because, and I'll say this, and I don't mean this as a slight to anybody, right? When you have someone like when you have, all boys aren't blue. I'm blanking on their name. Blame COVID. George M. Johnson, thank you. When you have a George M. Johnson who sells a book like All Boys Aren't Blue, you have Tre'vell who has their book, right? And they're talking about trans representation in TV. It can be very easy for you to get in your head about what you're wanting to write. And you can say, well, why do I need to write this if all my favorite people are writing stuff that I feel like they're what I want to write has already been said, right? So I think that can be really hard. I would say when you have a true, like I said, seeing the Luther Vandross doc and recognizing that there were so many things I was reveling with within my own self eternally while I was processing the article I was writing about that film, that for me locked me into, okay, I can do this. I have to find other people who I look up to and talk about how they helped me become Dr. Jon Paul. Got it. And it literally, the words just kind of started to pour out. It was like I knew the story had always been there. I just kind of really needed that direct, that North Star per se. So yeah, just lock into the thing that you think is really important to you, and don't get caught up in your head about who's already said it. Say it your way, and the book will happen.
I have another question.
Sure.
This Black Fat Femme, the book, is coming out at obviously a very strange time. Are you girded for battle? How do you keep from, in general, in this era, being a little bit more insular than you would want to be?
Yes, I've it's funny because on this press tour, I've been asked this question quite a lot. A lot of folks have asked me, what are your thoughts about putting out a book at such a very, very tumultuous time, what feels like a very tense time? And I think, kind of in the same vein of I'm a big believer that nothing has really changed. There were covert ways that folks were working against us in the last few years. Now they're just doing it overtly. So that's the thing I sit with. I'm like, okay, this stuff is now in our face. Okay, now we know that, right? We know who the people are that really want to get rid of us. Got it. There's a part of me that is still nervous. I'm not going to hold you. I'm not going to even act like I got it all. There is a part of me that's really worried that, I don't know what the world is going to look like for me once this book is out, with everything out there. But there's also a part of me that's like, good. I'm glad that this book is coming out at a time when somebody just needs something that can help them feel seen or help them put their thoughts together, or need something that can just hold them, right? There are a lot of book talk people that are saying that. They're saying these books are what's getting me through. And I'm hoping that this book can be that for some people. There are folks out there who just need to know that they're seen. And so I'm really happy to know that this book is coming out at a time when a lot of us feel like the world's trying to get rid of us. So
it's going to be contraband in Florida.
More than likely.
So,
and I'm ready for that battle too.
We'll smuggle it in there. I'll get a plane and we'll just drop it from the plane.
Drop it in, honey. Yes, yes.
Neal, did you have another question by any chance?
Just your thoughts, Dr. John, about or anyone, Tre'vell, just about and I don't know if this is in the book too, about Luther, and sort of the controversy, maybe that's too big a word, about, Patty talking about him. And I mean, I just know his music really was a big part of my childhood. And, knowing now that, what we all kind of assumed was true, would have made a big difference. And I know some people are just like, well, even whether Patty said something that's not Luther. And, how do you feel about talking about Luther as a member of our community? Is it controversial still, or not so much?
No, so I made it very clear as I was writing the chapter that me talking about Luther Vandross in my book alongside all these queer people is not me inadvertently saying that I think Luther Vandross is queer or not. I wanted to be very clear on that. I said, this is not me saying Luther's queer and everybody should celebrate Luther for that reason. Okay, I could have done that, but I didn't. I said, what this chapter is really about is about the ways that people suspected Luther Vandross, like his sexuality, and the ways that the world moved around that, and what it told me about how I reveled with my own sexuality, seeing that the world did that. And so I think for me, it's, I think there's a larger conversation that needs to be had, not necessarily about whether we think Luther was queer or not, or what his legacy would have meant to us if he did come out. I think it has a lot to do with the ways that the world, we should be having more conversations around the ways, and this is the next project that I'm working on. I tightly want to just kind of like tip on it, but really talking about the ways that media has fueled trans, anti-queer rhetoric for so long, and no one's been held accountable for it. And I really, that's kind of what what I've been thinking a lot about is, yes, it would have been nice to kind of be able to say, yes, we have another queer, ancestor, transcestor there for us, but there's still a larger conversation around how I personally feel that media kind of drove him to his own demise in a way. So
yeah, it's a tough subject to explore. So I commend you for tackling it. And when you were saying before about Ozempic and how it used to be, I don't know, 5 years ago, whenever it was, there was felt like there was an inflection point where we were embracing different bodies, and there was sort of a kindness that was being, we can't be cruel to each other online, and let's turn a page on that. And obviously it feels like we've done a 180. That horrible Congresswoman Nancy Mace was using the anti-trans slur just yesterday, I think, and just repeating it over and over. And it's just, I feel like like it's just such a representation of the fact that we're going backwards in so many ways. And it's like, I think John was right. It's like the way your book would have been received 5 years ago, it seems like it's so different than how it's going to be received now. Not necessarily by, us in the community, but, the greater world. There's just such a cruelty that's being encouraged. And it's just, I just commend anyone who's putting their heart and soul out for the public to consume, because it's tough. It's tough out there.
Yeah.
And it's not fair that we have people who are supposed to be role models that are just encouraging cruelty instead of kindness.
Yeah. And there's, like I said, I think there's a part of me that knows that and has kind of said, I've no shade. I've been to hell and back, and and I'm still here. So I think of it that way. This book being kind of a testament to this idea of the world has tried to stamp me out so many different ways and different times, and I'm still here. So
yeah, it's awesome.
Can I ask a couple? I just have two more questions. But if okay, so. The second one, I want to ask about your friendship with Tre'vell, what you like about each other, and what the bond is there. The deep bond is. It's we all need a friend like that. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
but the first question is, who have been some surprising allies along the way in your life? You know, not just with the book, John, but in life. Like, huh? You know, that people
Mm,
that gave you hope because you didn't think they were the a person that would, you know, be on your side. You know, I saw something
mm,
recently, Marlo Thomas. I mean, I know that she's, you know, what some would, you know, call, you know, woke, even at age 80, whatever she is, but
mhm,
um, has championed trans folk and along with everybody, you know,
mhm.
demonstrably. And you know, there are some stars out there, but anyway, so that's the question.
Yeah. I think about it specifically. There's been two moments that have made me kind of go, my God. One of them was a couple of months ago, and then one of them was actually more recently. Ryan Bath, I don't know, she's married to Paradise. What is his name? I can see his face, but I can't say it. Yes, yes.
Sterling K. Brown.
Sterling K. Brown, thank you. She had, basically jumped into my DMs on Instagram and had said, "Hey, I listened to your podcast. Just want to let you know that I love what you're doing. I love everything you're doing. I'm a huge fan. Let's go to lunch." And we really went to lunch. Like we genuinely went, we had lunch, and we're planning to do lunch again in the next couple of weeks. And it's really cool, to hear her talk to me or text me and say, "Me and Sterling are having this conversation and we don't want to do it the wrong way. So, what are your thoughts?" Right? Like she's looking to me as a friend and as a peer who's trying to help her navigate some of these tougher conversations around gender identity. And it's like I would never think that my name would be a household name around Sterling K. Brown, right? Um, but the fact that I can hear them in audio texts going back and forth about stuff and him saying, "I want to get this right. Ask Dr. Jon Paul what this man knows me." Right, like it's a really cool feeling. So there's that. I think the other moment was more recently. I was at, as you all know, I was at Creating Change, following Tre'vell around like a puppy, and there was a moment on, I think, the second to last day where Miss Majors kind of gave a talk. And I have never met Miss Majors. I know of Miss Majors. I've mentioned Miss Majors in some of the writings and some of the stuff that I have done. But I've never, and I know people who know her like really, really good. Like they've gone to her house, they got her phone number, they can just show up at any given time. And Miss Majors is like, "Come on in." They got a key, right? I'm not that girl. But I will say I went to her booth and I went to sit down to talk to her. And I was like, "Hi," very timid me. When I get around people that I fangirl around, I tend to get real timid. And I was like, "Hi, I'm Dr. Jon Paul. I just want to let you know I'm a fan." She was like, "I know who you are." And it was like, yo, like somebody that you think of as like she's up there for me in my head in terms of the work. Like she's a Marsha P. Johnson to me in my head, right? Legendary. For her to be like, "I know who you are, I know what you do, it's good to see you," kind of moment. It blew my mind. And so, I sometimes will downplay a lot of the stuff that I do, but there are moments, and I think that's the thing with Tre'vell that has really helped me in terms of being friends with him. Tre'vell gives me the audacity and the space to talk my shit, and pop my shit around the work that I do. And so having moments where people you look at as like, a hero who knows who you are from afar, it blows my mind. That kind of stuff blows my mind. So
Cool. Now, Tre'vell, what do you like about John? Pretend we're on the
Why?
red carpet.
What do I like about
yeah.
Jon Paul? Well, first of all, Jon Paul loves a jumpsuit and a two-piece, like a matching two-piece moment. And listen, as the world goes to shit, we need to
Yes.
look great. Um, and so I appreciate that Jon Paul is gonna put that shit on. As they say. Jon Paul is also, I think, really, I can't remember when we met.
We
Because
met in
I'm old and I don't remember
2017.
nothing.
Yeah, we were
2017.
2017.
How did we meet, Jon Paul? Because I don't know.
We met, so we were both at the time. There was talk and there was entertainment. There was someone we both knew. I think his name was Chief. He was putting something together, and he was trying to put kind of a collective of journalists together locally in the LA area. And so he reached out to me and asked me to come to this thing that he was doing. And then Tre'vell was there. And when I met Tre'vell, I said, "Oh, that's gonna be my friend. That I don't care if they don't want to be friends with me, they are going to be my friend." And we exchanged phone numbers, and it's just been a Kiki house down boots ever since then. So
Yeah, I think it's just always good to have somebody who is like, equally yoked with you and similarly aligned for like the work that we are doing and the work that we are engaged in. And so it's always helpful to be like, hey girl, I know you had this experience. Can you help me out with this? And it really is a two-way street. You got a contact I need, I got a contact you need. We scratching each other's back in a really beautiful way. And the reality is you don't actually find people like that in
take.
the industry in a real way.
Mhm. Mhm.
Folks who aren't concerned with your light dimming theirs. Like they realize that Jon Paul realizes, and I think, more and more over the years realizes that, their light is their light and other people's light is their light. And just because somebody else is shining as bright doesn't mean you can't shine as well. And I think both of us being aligned there has been, a really kind of grateful and fruitful part of our friendship.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Mhm.
Nice. Well, maybe you two could write a book together sometime.
Stay tuned.
I mean, there are talks of things down the pipeline. So we'll be working together one way or another. But yeah, I mean, to your point, Tre'vell, I think that's also the piece of it is having someone in this industry who is going to tell you, get your shit together, or ooh, I don't know if I can cuss, but get your stuff together, get your life together, or you're doing this thing over here. Be careful about X, Y, and Z. Like I think that's the thing I love about Tre'vell. Tre'vell is very good about keeping me grounded. And you need people like that in this industry, especially when you have quote unquote all these, because that's the thing, as much as I'm not, and I'll say this, as much as I'm not Beyonce, right? There is still moments where you're in a space and people will say stuff to you or will fangirl or, oh my God, it's so good to see you. Oh my God, I'm such a fan. I love what you do. And that stuff can get to you, right? It can start to make you feel like you're bigger than what you really are. And so it's nice to be around Tre'vell and to, hop in the car and go get some chicken with him. And they, girl, I saw that thing. Now be careful about that. Or, oh, you're doing this really good thing over there. I'm so proud of you. Like, so it's good to have that. And I think that's the thing, I can say like Tre'vell is a good Judy. I know Tre'vell is going to be honest with me. I know Tre'vell is not going to steer me in the wrong direction. And I also know they're not going to screw me. And I think that's the thing that's really important in this industry is having people around you, that you truly can trust, I can leave my wallet at Tre'vell's house and know that my money will still be there.
That's funny.